If you commented on my last video about the Solingen knife attack to say that I have been proven wrong, I never said that the attacker was not an Islamic terrorist. I said that we should not repeat gossip and speculation as fact. And I also said that we should not believe conspiracy theories about the police or the media refusing to release information, especially when, in fact, they did release information as soon as they had information to release. But since I made that video, as I predicted, a lot of new information has come to light. And most importantly, the police now have a suspect in custody, and they are very confident that he is in fact the attacker. So let's go through what we know about him and his possible connections with terrorism. He's identified in the German media as Issa al-H. And yes, his full name has not been released, and that's because, in most cases, a suspect's exact identity is not released until they have been found guilty. And this rule applies to everyone, regardless of where they are from or what they've been accused of. The suspect is 26 years old and originally from Syria. He arrived in Germany in December 2022 and applied for asylum. However, the following year, the German authorities applied to have him transferred to Bulgaria because that is where he first entered the EU. Some reports seem to suggest that this is because Germany denied his asylum claim and Bulgaria was responsible for deporting him to Syria. But given the timescale and subsequent events, I think the alternative explanation is much more likely. Germany refused to process his claim and asked Bulgaria to do it. Either way, Issa al-H was to be deported to Bulgaria, but when officials turned up at the asylum shelter to detain him, he wasn't there. Apparently, he'd disappeared. One opposition politician has alleged that he hadn't actually gone to ground, he had simply gone out. That small detail is worth remembering because it may prove to be significant. In any case, the deportation failed. Since at that point the suspect hadn't done anything to suggest that he was a threat and had no known extremist tendencies, it seems that officials considered him to be a very low priority. This happened in June last year. By August, the deadline for transferring him to Bulgaria had expired, meaning that Germany was now responsible for processing his application. Authorities didn't find him again until after this deadline had passed. At the end of last year, Issa H was granted subsidiary protection. Now, this is quite common for people who are fleeing just war in general, and what it means is that he was given protection because if he were to return to his home country, his life would be at risk. But he was not, strictly speaking, a refugee. To be granted actual refugee status, you need to show that you are being actively persecuted because of, for example, your ethnicity or your sexual orientation or your religion. He was then assigned a place in a refugee shelter in Solingen, where he remained for a while completely unnoticed until the attack took place. A couple of days after that, when police who were following up a lead arrived at the shelter, he turned himself in. So does he have connections with Islamic State, a notorious and pretty brutal terrorist organization? From the information that we have at the moment, it seems very likely, but it's not completely certain. It is true that very soon after the attack, IS claimed responsibility, but that does not mean that IS was telling the truth. It's actually quite common for terrorist organizations to falsely claim responsibility, and initially IS didn't actually provide any evidence to back up the claim. Later, they released a video of a young man swearing allegiance to IS, but unfortunately his face is completely masked, so it's very difficult to confirm his identity. He also gives his name as Samarkand, although that could simply be an alias. But he also gives his place of birth, and that is identical to the suspect's. At this point, it seems that although some connection with IS seems very likely indeed, exactly what that connection is still unknown. But the circumstances surrounding his arrest may help to throw some light on the subject. Apparently, police were actually at his shelter when he arrived, wanting to go home, according to reports, still wearing the same blood-stained clothes he was wearing on the night of the attack. And so, rather than attempt to flee, he gave himself up. This has been reported as a confession, but the latest I've heard is that he's actually refusing to cooperate and hasn't made any comment. It seems that he simply realized he wasn't going to escape arrest. He might as well not try, but that doesn't mean that he admitted to anything. But what this does suggest is that he didn't have a support network behind him. He didn't have anybody helping him evade justice or even just give him a change of clothes. And this lends some weight to the allegation that he hadn't disappeared last year, he'd simply not been at home. So he could have been working alone, but that does not mean that there is no connection at all with IS. In fact, it's quite possible that they did indeed recruit him, but as a lone operator. This can be done on the internet. What seems to be happening is that IS is reaching out to young Muslims living in Europe and radicalizing them online, essentially brainwashing them. And this actually presents a bit of a problem for the authorities because it's a bit more difficult to monitor. 10 or 15 years ago, German authorities could easily watch suspected hate preachers operating inside the country and keep tabs on who they were actually talking to. Online, it is still possible to monitor these activities. It's just very difficult. But this is basically what we know so far. Now, this whole story does raise questions about immigration, asylum, refugees, knife crime, and a whole lot of other subjects, but that would be a completely different video. For now, let's just make sure that we understand the difference between fact and conjecture.